i24NEWS, we are joined by Colonel Miri, Director of the International Institute for Counterterrorism. Thank you very much for being with us, Miri. I want to discuss something the IDF mentioned. 11,000 terror targets struck since the beginning of the war, yet Hamas still obviously having the ability to fire rockets and to wage war. What exactly does 11,000 terror targets mean, and how many have to be taken out before we can actually see an impact on their fighting capacity?
Ariel, Hamas has been preparing both the terror attack, but what they're going to call their defense, for literally a decade. That underground subterranean arena has 30,000 of the trained terror fighters. And in addition, Hamas has a lot of close supporters that are throughout the Gaza Strip. All of this within that urban civilian above ground arena, aside from the below ground. So what does 11,000 targets mean? It means that you're getting to the opening of a tunnel, and when you're attacking the tunnel itself, you could be attacking the building that the tunnel starts from. When you see the aerial visuals of the IDF or the Israeli Air Forces attacking something from the air, it could be that the ground forces have been inside the building, have seen the entrance to the tunnel, or they are nearby. You can see the different connections between anti-tank missile terror teams that are on vehicles, but they can also be in a building, in a window, coming out of a tunnel. Every single one of these is going to be a different target. The cache of weapons. All of this is information that we pretty much had before. And in that sense, it's something that you were building over the last month. The interaction of the troops going into the Gaza Strip are going to find more specific targets. So it's the combination of what we knew from before and did not attack in the past and are now doing so specifically. And I think the biggest event in that sense was the attack against the terror tunnels underneath the Jabalia refugee camp. That's the big attack of yesterday.
Absolutely. And on the topic of getting into those tunnels, rescuing hostages and the like, we're now hearing reports that U.S. commando teams have showed up in Israel to help Israel with the intel side of this. What are they bringing to the table here? What sort of necessary skill set needs to be brought to bear to tackle this situation?
Well, sadly, in this world, it's the United States and a few of the other Western countries who have been in this type of it was caves and tunnels, both in Afghanistan and the area in Asia. Israel, in that sense, has done this in the past. This is not the first time we're meeting tunnels, but until now, we met what I'm going to call the attack tunnels, the ones that Hamas built from the Gaza Strip into Israel, and of course, the ones that Hezbollah built from Lebanon into Israel. Those we destroyed to a large degree. But right now we're talking about getting into them. How do you go underground? How do you find the entrances? What do you do inside that arena, which is very, very crowded? It can be booby-trapped. What type of weapons can you use? How do you avoid those traps that they're putting? These are things that in learning you do systematically, clearly, and you try to learn from whoever has done it before. Again, nobody's ever done it in any way on the scale and the challenges that we're facing right now in that subterranean arena underneath the refugee camps in the city of Gaza, literally throughout the Gaza Strip.
Definitely, Miri. We're going to come right back to you shortly on the northern front. I'm going to turn back to Miri now to analyze the north a little bit more. Miri, one of the things that we're hearing, it's not just on the north, but those flaring up from Houthi rebels in Yemen, other reports saying from the Iraq border as well. Ultimately, Israel says they want to focus on Gaza right now, but Israel still has to respond to this sort of aggression, does it not?
Israel is responding to these aggressions all the time, but look at this broader aspect. When we're talking about the Hamas attack, it's a Hamas attack, but to a large degree, and that's part of our failure of October 7th, Israel was looking at Hezbollah, who was planning a similar attack, only even bigger than what Hamas did. So we're very focused on not just the preemptive idea, making sure that nothing expands there, being ready for any possibility. Because the big question is, so why hasn't Hezbollah attacked? Why have they not brought out their forces in the way that they know how? And here, Ariel, I would say that perhaps to put up a big map of the greater Middle East, Iran, over the last decade, certainly throughout the Syrian war, became the main backer and the state sponsor of different Shiite and non-Shiite forces throughout the Middle East, like the Houthis in Yemen, who have already been firing different types of weaponry towards Israel. The Houthis in Yemen have been fighting both in Yemen and against Saudi Arabia and against the Emirates. Again, if you look at the map, you'll see, and the capabilities that the Houthis in Yemen have are from Iran. When we say about Iraq, or for that matter, the Golan Heights on the Syrian side and throughout Syria, you have different Shiite forces that are built, sustained, and then manned by different Shiites from around the world, that all of their capabilities come from Iran. So Iran is poking. They're making sure that they say we're participating. Send it from Yemen, send it from Iraq, from the Shiites on the Golan Heights, and Hezbollah is keeping what I'm going to call a low-key, constant participation. But we all have to be aware. Hezbollah could go full scale. And if Hezbollah goes full scale, the Iranians are the ones that would tell them to do so, then we're all going to see a much harsher arena that we're in. So I say all of that as we look around, we're all aware. I'm very proud as an Israeli of the defenses that we've put up. If it's Arrow that was used against incoming from Yemen in very long range missiles, if it's the David Sling, and of course Iron Dome that is protecting us, but those are all our protections against these incoming. The fact that they're all being used right now, these are the things we have defenses against. We will stand strong, but it keeps getting more and more, and we all need to be aware it could get worse.
And because everyone believes that to be almost an inevitability at this point, ultimately, what is that going to look like if Israel is forced to split its military capabilities between the north as well as Gaza?
First of all, we have the capabilities. It's something that we've been understanding for years. We always talked about two different arenas. We erroneously thought that Hezbollah would start and Hamas would join in. Hamas started, definitely surprised us, and we've been waiting for Hezbollah to join in. So we have those capabilities. In this case, I'd also zoom out again in the map because the different Shiite forces, the Iranian-backed Shiite forces, the Iranian-trained, armed Shiite forces that are all over different places in the Middle East have been attacking U.S. forces, U.S. locations all over the Middle East over the last 3 weeks. It didn't even just start in the last week. So we're already talking about something where Iran states clearly it's the U.S. and Israel. It's the big devil and the little devil. So that if you're talking about Israel's response, we are ready. That doesn't make it easy. Casualties, very harsh war, we are ready. And the United States and other countries are upping their understanding and their direct involvement in what is going on here, because this is not Israel against the world. It's not Israel against Islam. It is about both the Iranian, very strong Iranian monster trying to bring out something that will be all over, dragging everybody in, and we're all going to be able to withstand it. But as I say, this isn't alone. Though we could, it is together with the United States, and it is together with that Western world.
Absolutely, Miri. And I want to point out to our viewers right now, the images you were just seeing on the screen are live images from strikes in Gaza as Israel is pounding Hamas terror infrastructure as support for the ground forces operating there. I'm going to turn back to you again, Miri, because we've been discussing that ultimately it is Iran's hand that is behind this situation. And we're talking about the response on the north, we're talking about the response on the south, but ultimately, what is the response in Tehran itself?
They are so supportive of the Al-Quds, whatever the Hamas have called this in that sense. And here it's part of that manipulation that we all need to be aware of, Ariel, meaning that Hamas, or it could have been Hezbollah, start a war, start a horrific genocidal terror attack, unheard of, unprecedented, and immediately base it on the fact that they're trying, to free Palestine. They're not trying to free anybody. They're trying to destroy Israel. They're not freeing the Palestinians. Hamas is the worst thing that happened to them, together with Iran. So Iran states clearly that they support the Palestinians. They're trying to frame this as part of being within the Palestinian arena, which it is not. It's about annihilating Israel. Hamas calls for our destruction. Hezbollah calls for our destruction. Their ideologies go hand in hand. I think, though, Ariel, people should be aware. Iran is very, very scared, both of Israel and of the United States, and they want to be sure that they are not attacked, meaning they are using the proxies from Yemen, from Iraq, from Syria, for that matter, Hamas in the Palestinian arena and the Hezbollah up north. They're going to use the proxies. They don't want to be attacked themselves, and they've stated that clearly.
Well, thank you, Miri, for that explanation. The idea of a multinational peacekeeping force of regional partners to the United States, or people the United States can at least work with, how viable is this really from Israel's perspective, given that one of the parties in discussion is Qatar, who's funded Hamas throughout the entire conflict?
Not just conflict, but for years. But remember that Israel acquiesced with that. And I say that because at the end, Ariel, as Owen said before, and I wholeheartedly agree, there are only bad options, but they are options. And if you don't choose any of those bad options, then what are you going to do? Have Israel rule over? I think that the one thing that Israel understands very clearly is that we don't want to conquer. We don't want to rule over. We left in 2005 for a different kind of future. That doesn't mean right now that we're going to let Hamas stay, that we're not going to let. But I do think that these different partners that we do not like, none of the options are good, are the ones that are on the table. We need to keep that, as I say, it's an open mind about the bad options, but they are still options, and they're things that we need to look at clearly. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the different countries around, nobody's going to want to be there, but there may be that necessity, and that's where it's going to go to.
And you mentioned Saudi Arabia there at the end, because they are the big wild card in this. They have a lot of power. They've paused any of the normalization, but what role might they have in actually managing or resolving this issue?
Ariel, we're 24 days into a war that is unprecedented in between Israel and our surroundings. It's unprecedented because the terror group Hamas do not only challenge, terrorize Israel. Hamas is Hamas Muslim Brotherhood. There's a connection here that we don't talk a lot that has to do also with all of the different, I'm not going to say moderate, but certainly the Sunni governments, not exactly democracies throughout the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia. So in that sense, there's a very quiet aspect of what needs to be done with Hamas that impacts Saudi Arabia directly about the day after, about what that means. And I think that here there are interests that are not above. We're not going to be talking about them, but they are actually quite long-term.
And Miri, less than a minute left here. When we're talking about bad options, what can we say about this humanitarian pause the United States is asking for?
That all of us want a humanitarian pause for the people in the Gaza Strip. It doesn't matter if we think that they themselves overwhelmingly support Hamas. As I look at that, I say, absolutely, get them water, get them medicine. I don't want anybody to starve to death. I want them to live, and that's why we've been telling them to move. And that's a pause. It has nothing to do with a ceasefire. It has nothing to do with the continuation of Israeli actions against Hamas in the Gaza Strip.
Thank you very much, Miri, for helping us understand all of the background, the tactical, and the more in-depth intelligence behind this conflict. Thank you very much. And also